I feel like we've all been scammed at one point or another in our lives. Whether it was a dodgy salesman trying to sell us timeshares or pyramid schemes, or maybe someone just really tried to sell you some of those magic beans that they had lying around. But this next person might just have pulled off the greatest scam of all time, defrauding investors out of millions and putting patients at risk. So let's meet the woman who fooled everyone and got away with it. Theranos was a private American biotechnology company that was founded in 2003 by Elizabeth Holmes. The company specialized in blood testing and claimed to be able to perform accurate tests using just a few drops of blood instead of the usual vials. This breakthrough would revolutionize blood testing, meaning that it could be done from home or in small clinics rather than having to go to a lab. And as the tech world knows, if you can make things smaller, people will buy them by the bucket load. Just ask Apple. And that's not all. Theranos claimed that their devices could test for everything from pregnancy to cancer. The company even boasted about being able to detect all types of cancer using a single drop of blood. And if that didn't blow your mind enough, wait until you hear this. They said that they were working on a device that could test for HIV and hepatitis C. Now, that's a medical miracle right there. The concept itself sounds pretty good. After all, who wouldn't want to know if they had some nasty diseases brewing inside their body? If you think about it, this would also save countless lives because many conditions are only detectable through regular blood tests. But there was a problem. The problem was that it wasn't true. Theranos' technology never worked. Their machines couldn't perform the tests that they claimed to be capable of doing. And this is coming from a guy that once put washing powder in his coffee because he thought that it would give him superpowers. But I digress. To make matters worse, when customers sent their results to doctors, they were often given incorrect diagnoses because the test results were so inaccurate. There are even stories of people being told that they didn't have cancer only to find out months later that they actually did. And it was too late. But how did no one notice? Well, it turns out that Theranos was hiding their inability to perform the tests from customers. They were basically faking the results. In some cases, they diluted patient samples so that they could be used for multiple tests. In other cases, they simply reported results as being within acceptable limits. Now, this isn't just unethical, it's downright evil. I mean, imagine being told that you don't have cancer when you actually do. It's a nightmare scenario. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't the doctors notice that something was up? Well, it turns out that they did. Many doctors reported that the test results they received from Theranos didn't make sense given the patient's symptoms. However, they trusted Theranos' reputation and assumed that the tests were correct. After all, Theranos claimed to have partnered with some big names in the industry, including Pfizer, Roche, and Walmart. Plus, their founder, Elizabeth Holmes, was a Stanford dropout who had raised over $900 million from investors like Betsy DeVos, the Walton family, the Cox family, and Nancy DeVos. Surely a company with that kind of backing couldn't possibly be a fraud, right? Wrong. As it turned out, most of the partnerships that Theranos claimed to have didn't exist, and the money they raised from investors was just a clever ruse to cover up their inability to perform tests accurately. But how did they get away with it for so long? Well, it turns out that Elizabeth Holmes was a master manipulator. You see, she had a talent for convincing people that what she was selling was the real deal, even though it wasn't. She was able to do this by dressing the part, talking the talk, and generally making herself seem like someone she wasn't. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't that just a bit of acting? Well, yes, it is. But Holmes took it to another level. She studied the way that CEOs talked and acted and then copied them. She even hired a voice coach to help her develop a deeper voice, which she hoped would make her seem more authoritative. And it worked. Investors poured billions into her company, not realizing that they were being duped. In fact, it wasn't until after Holmes was indicted that many of her investors realized that she had been lying to them all along. Now, you might be wondering why anyone would invest in such a risky venture. After all, blood testing isn't exactly a sexy industry, and Theranos' technology was never proven to work. But that's where Holmes's manipulation skills came in. She was able to convince investors that her company was on the verge of a major breakthrough, even though it wasn't. She also made them believe that Theranos was already profitable, when in reality, they were losing millions every year. But the most important thing that Holmes did was to cultivate an air of mystery around herself. She was careful not to reveal too much about her technology, which only served to make it seem more impressive in the minds of investors. For example, she wouldn't allow anyone to take photos of the lab where the tests were performed. And she also prevented employees from talking to outsiders about what went on inside the company. Now, this might seem like a strange thing to do, but it was actually a clever way to keep people guessing and ultimately convince them to invest in her company. So what happened next? Well, eventually the truth caught up with Holmes and her company. In 2018, Theranos shut down and Holmes was charged with criminal fraud. Now, you might be thinking, why didn't she just admit to the fraud and move on with her life? Well, it turns out that she didn't want to do that. Holmes decided to fight the charges against her, even though the evidence was overwhelming. She went to trial, and in January 2022, she was found guilty on 4 counts of fraud and conspiracy. Holmes was sentenced to 11 years in prison, but she's already out on appeal. Yeah, technically she's a free woman right now. Now, you might be wondering why she was only sentenced to 11 years in prison when she defrauded investors out of billions of dollars. Well, it turns out that the prosecution didn't focus on the amount of money that was lost. Instead, they focused on the fact that Holmes had put patients at risk by providing them with inaccurate test results. Now, this is understandable since Holmes's actions could have led to people being misdiagnosed and not receiving the treatment they needed. It's hard to say what the biggest scam in history is. There's Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme, which defrauded investors out of some $65 billion. Then there's the Enron scandal, which saw the company's executives lying about the company's finances and causing investors to lose tens of billions of dollars. And let's not forget about the Volkswagen emissions scandal, which saw the company cheating on emissions tests and polluting the environment. But somehow I think that Elizabeth Holmes and her Theranos scam might just take the cake. After all, she not only defrauded investors out of billions of dollars, but she also put patients at risk of serious misdiagnosis. And that's not something that can be easily forgiven. And speaking of not being easily forgiven, let's move on to the next point. What's the craziest thing that you've ever heard of someone scamming? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to learn more about other crazy scams, we've done a video on the largest Ponzi scheme in history. It's a wild story that will leave you shaking your head in disbelief. So check it out and let us know what you think. Thanks for watching, and remember to stay tuned for more videos like this.